All right. Now I'm live. All right. Gotta wait. Hi. Happy Tuesday. I always, there's a delay between the messaging I get saying that I'm live and YouTube actually being live. So I get confused a little bit of am I really live, even though the green button's telling me live, but I can't see myself yet because it's got, I don't know, I think the delay must only be a second or two, but it feels like eternity, if that makes sense. But anyhow, happy Tuesday. It's kind of a cold day. Not really cold in the grand scheme of things, but in the 60s. It's been kind of gray since the weekend. But hey, it is what it is. Spring and all that stuff, or I guess it feels like it's been, I mean, up until the last few days, it's felt like it's summer already, but it is still spring, I think, officially, technically. But we're not here to talk about that. Well, I mean, I guess we can. But I guess I would talk about. I scheduled this shindig to talk about something that was new. It was new for me, and I didn't plan on it. It kind of came together fairly last minute over the weekend, which was to two things. One, to do something do two things. Yeah, two things really I haven't ever done before. The first one, and it probably wasn't a great idea for me to do them both at the same time. I would say if I was going to tell somebody, hey, how should you do this? Probably not this the way I decided to go about it. So there are a couple things going on. I'm trying to kind of do a little bit more. And I thought, there are all these, it's not like there's tons. There's a fair amount of gaming stores in New York City now. Over the last, I don't know, decade, there's been kind of a rise in gaming stores. Really, it's not really about adults so much as it's kids. There's been kind of if you're a parent, you probably know what I'm talking about, kind of an evolution of after school programs and after school things and summer camps, which now have a lot of kind of fun, nerdier stuff. When I was a kid, it was basically sports camps, and maybe maybe there was if you were chess or something like that, or music, but there wasn't a lot of like, let's play role-playing games or board games stuff as the thing. But it's a thing now. Hey, Frederick, it's a thing. And and there's a lot of money there. There's a lot of parents, like in my neighborhood and adjacent neighborhoods, and certainly in Manhattan, other places that have a lot of income to spend on such things. And that has allowed, I think, these gaming stores to thrive and expand because they can open up a big gaming store and they can have the adult gaming stuff going on. But I think for most of them, a lot of their bread and butter comes from these after school and summer programs. In any case, they got a bunch of these out there. There was maybe 10 years ago or so. Gosh, I don't know if it's been that long. No, it's probably not been that long. But there was one of these other places that's much closer to me. They would do one night a week. They would do an adult board gaming night, and I loved it. I used to go religiously until they changed the way it was set up, and it just kind of lost its mojo for me. But I wanted to sort of do something. Okay, so there are these, gaming nights. Now, if you go as a player, I think you have to pay, but if you go as a GM, you don't have to pay. And in fact, they give you, at the place I went, they give you, because they do food and drinks, and they give you a food voucher, which I forgot to use. And I was kicking myself as I'm leaving, saying, you know what? They said you get a food voucher, or I guess you could use it for a drink or something. And I didn't. I totally flubbed that. So I flushed some free money down the drain. So I thought, you know what? Let me try it. All right. So that was the first, but I'd never run an open table kind of game shop game before. I've done a couple of convention games now, so I wouldn't call myself an expert at that, but I guess I'd say I'm a veteran. I don't know how many times you have to get before you go from sort of a neophyte to a veteran, but maybe I'm at that border. I've done that a couple times. But just running a game, kind of an open table sort of concept. It's not open table like at West Marches thing. Like, I mean, open table is basically anybody can come sit down and kind of thing. Frederick says it's still mostly card games out in Arizona. Well, I think a lot of it for New York City really has to do with the fact that there was a bunch of family that there's been a rise, I guess, in families. I don't know if where you are in Arizona, it's not as much families as it are retired people. And of course, different areas might be different things. But here in the city, I imagine Arizona, there might be like I've never really been to Arizona, but I imagine there's more outdoorsy kind of stuff going on. Whereas not that you can't do outdoorsy stuff in the city, but a lot of us, you're in the city. I mean, I'm actually really close to a giant park, but I think in general, people are more into looking kind of city stuff and being able to take someone, go to somewhere in the city, go somewhere, and they're kind of doing that. It makes more sense. And like, hey, let's go out into the, I don't know, the canyons and the high plains or wherever's going on in Arizona, which I imagine would be really cool. But we don't have that. We don't have that here. Or at least you got to drive a ways usually to get to somewhere like that. Frederick says game shop games with players coming and going is the best GM skill test. Well, I think, all right. So I'm not going to, I guess I won't bury the lead. I had a really good experience. I'm not going to say it's because I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't consider myself like, I GM skills approved, because I think there's a lot of variables. And this is what gave me pause. Now, I don't know if different stores have different, well, I mean, obviously different stores do things differently. The way this store does it is they actually have a couple of stores. And I think they have 3 stores. And each of these stores, or at least 2 of them, I think, have these nights where they essentially have volunteer GM nights. And here, let me take a sip of just cold water for the working man. One night a week. One's on Mondays, one's on Wednesdays. And for me, the Monday just seemed to work better than Wednesdays. And I also go to game night on Thursdays. So I felt like, if I try a Monday, I'm kind of spreading it out a little bit. I'm not going back to back kind of thing. So you can go on their Discord, and they have the Discord really just links to a form. You fill out the form, and I did a terrible job from an advertising standpoint. Not that I feel like most of the folks who I interact with in the channel and on my Discord aren't around the New York area, not local to me. So it's not like I feel like, and I don't have, this channel is not exactly, I'm not exactly in influencer territory. So I didn't, I just put my game, but I think I really put the most generic wording down for sort of like, yeah, it's like an OSR or NSR playtest is basically what I titled it. And then I gave the little blurb. I used my adventure that I've run now. I guess this is the 3rd time I've run it, Escape, which basically is a reverse dungeon crawl. So you start outside, you start in the dungeon, or kind of not necessarily the bottom of the dungeon, but you start in the dungeon and you're trying to get out. And so I threw that in there as well. And then I think they asked for how many players max. And I think I put 5, which I think is a good number. And especially, I would think, I know some people put like 6, 7, and yeah, you could do that. And I could do that. And I think if I was playing BX or a similar system, I could probably run it no problem. But I think when you're not adding, when you get to a certain number, more players, as much as you want to be nice and be like, yeah, it can be tough. I think there's definitely an art and skill to running with a bunch of players. I mean, I've heard stories of someone saying, I forget who it was, some old timer at Gary Con having like 20 people in their hotel room and basically running just this kind of totally ad hoc adventure. I don't even know if they were using dice or rules, whatever. He's just going around pointing fingers, and it was amazing, right? That not everybody can do that, or maybe it takes a skill to do that. But I put, I think, 5 people, which I think is a reasonable adventuring party number on the list. But you put it in the Discord, and then, all right, you fill out the form, and I did that on Saturday. So I kind of made up my mind, like, I'm going to try this, and I decided I'm going to try it on the Monday, and I'm only really doing it on the Saturday. Like Saturday night, I'm kind of thinking, like, they got this open gaming night. Let's do it. So I said, okay. So I fill out the form with my very generic information. And then I hit the button and submit it. And then kind of nothing happens. And then I sort of asked on Discord, it's like, okay, well, I submitted the form, and sort of what happens next? I think I was hoping, and I know that this is a problem without a good solution, I think, that folks could sign up through the Discord. Like I was anticipating that through their Discord, people are watching for these announcements and then would sign up. It's like, okay, great. And then for me, once I'm getting towards Monday, I can get a sense of how many people, if any, I should be expecting to show up. Now, I know that vagaries of life, not everybody's going to show, so on and so forth. But, I can get an idea of like, hey, this game has captured people's interest, and I've got some folks who are into it, or no, it's not. Of course, but but that you do have the opportunity because it's in the Discord. People can ask questions, which I missed. So I actually was going back to the Discord and checking to see that encounter section to see whether anyone was asking any questions or anything. And, I'd see the little white dot next to the Discord server. I go look at it. What I missed was somebody, I think yesterday afternoon, DM'd me directly on Discord, and I totally missed it until this morning. So I apologize. I apologize for that part of it. Oh, is that Betty back there? I guess that is Betty. So this idea of, well, how do you don't have a good sense of who's showing up? And when I was asking about it, basically one of the employees, whoever was running the kind of Discord, essentially said, well, they can come in, they can see the games that are being run, or at least some of them, and they can ask questions, but nothing is really settled until you show up, and then basically it kind of starts, or sort of player assembly time starts at 6:30, and then you start playing at 7. So you don't know. And for me, not that it's a big deal, but it's probably about a half an hour to 40 minutes. I mean, it took me actually much longer coming home because there was subway issues. But it's not a tiny. It's not right down the street from me. I gotta make my way over there. And so I was thinking like, well, I gotta go over there. And I'm already starting to think, between the really generic description that I gave and everything else, and the fact that it didn't seem like anybody's really paying attention to this Discord, at least this part of it. I'm thinking like, I'm going to show up there and nobody's going to show, and it's going to feel like a bummer, and it's going to be worse because I left. It's one thing to be bummed out, but you haven't actually invested time and effort to get over there. It's another one when you're kind of sitting there in person and nobody's coming. But them's the breaks, right? So, okay, so I closed down everything, left the house, motored over to the shop. Got there at about 6:20, so I had a little bit to wait for or maybe a little bit after. Yeah, I had 7 or 8 minutes to kind of muck around. So they have stuff they have a front end you can buy stuff. I checked to see if they had Daggerheart. I don't know what the availability of Daggerheart is. They didn't have it. They had the 5e stuff. They had, interestingly enough, and I don't know what this means, if anything, but they had Free League had a good section. They didn't have they don't have a large, like, this isn't a giant gaming shop by any means. Their retail selection is small, but D&D had of the role playing games. D&D definitely 5th edition had the biggest spot. Then actually Free League had a pretty good chunk. I want to say then maybe Warhammer had a chunk, and I know they also do wargaming and stuff there, and they had a big section with minis and paints, and they had a lot of the Warhammer mini stuff. So that probably was why kind of Warhammer did. And Paizo had a really tiny section of there. I think even if you put all this the few copies of Morkborg and maybe something related, probably there was as much Morkborg as there was Paizo. And I don't even remember if some of it was Starfinder versus Pathfinder or whatever. Basically, Paizo had a small chunk, and then they had some board games and card games and kind of other stuff. So I kind of look around there. Then I get seated. I feel like I have a pretty good kit, which I will show. Again, I am not a veteran, or maybe I feel like I'm just entering my veteranhood. But I developed this little kit. Developed like I'm a nuclear scientist. First at Claricon, and then I've kind of been taking it with me. So it has a couple elements to it. I got one of these little cheapo, I think this is a dollar store case from somewhere. And I think also at a dollar store of some kind, or maybe a craft store, got these wooden blocks, different colors. And they've been really handy. Because what I can do is, so I don't have a bunch of minis. I don't want to carry around a bunch of minis. I don't really want to get into drawing out battle maps and doing all the positioning. But I also understand that it's handy for me and for others to get a rough idea of things like your marching order or where you're positioned in a combat. I get it. I'm not, as much as I like Theater of the Mind, and that's my default, I totally am sympathetic to, hey, some kind of visual can be helpful for folks and for me. Like, I'm not omniscient in terms of that either. Yeah, it can be helpful. So I can use these blocks and just put them on the table and say, okay, I had the players pick their blocks, and they'll say, all right, and then you can put your colors in the order you want, and I have enough blocks that I'll make one block. I'll put by them, and then a block representing their marching order. So you can quickly kind of look at the table and say, okay, he's red and red's over there. She's yellow, yellow's over there, right? They're green, green's over there. And so you can kind of do that, and I'll use whatever colors left over will be kind of enemies or NPCs. So you can kind of have that. You can use it for marching order. You can use that if there's an issue with combat. Anything you want. In fact, there are probably some other interesting things you could do with this, which I didn't even think of. So I'll have to try this next time. So oftentimes you're rolling dice to figure out who gets attacked. Let's say, right, there's a melee, and you're all in melee with the big critter, and the big critter is going to attack somebody, right? But there's essentially equal opportunities of each, because everyone's in melee, everyone's done something. You could use get a little bag, an opaque bag, put one of everybody's cube in there, and then just draw the cube. Man, what a quick way to do that. And if you have enemies or NPCs, you could put cubes for their color in there, because the players are really only using two of these cubes. If I have one as an identifier and one for another one, so you have plenty of leftover cubes. I'm going to remember that, because I actually think that's a really cool thing. Next time I will do that. But I like these cubes. Really simple. Obviously, you don't need to be careful with them. They're just painted wooden blocks. Don't need to worry about the paint chipping. Don't need to worry about things getting bent or breaking. They're just some wooden blocks. Super easy. In the similar vein, I got these that I haven't even used yet, these different wooden hexes. I thought I could draw. I really need to do is go and draw some stuff on them so I could use them for terrain if I want to do hex stuff. But I haven't done that yet, but they're still here in the bag, or in the box, I should say. I bring out a bunch of note cards. The game I play tested in BX, you can pretty much, especially for a low-level character, which is what these adventures, I'm using low-level characters, or I'm running for low-level characters, you can fit everything on a note card. And plus, I can give these out for notes, or if I need to write a note, or someone wants to take notes. That's kind of the other element of this kit. So that's a great part. Another thing, which I think it was Yochai Gal hit me to, so I saw him use to good effect. I think it was at a PAX, was one of these little whiteboards that still has the markings from yesterday on it that I didn't do a good job of wiping away in time. So you get one of these whiteboards, and these are cheapy things. If this end up being whatever, I don't care. I'll just use it until the white is gone. It's just got, it's not fancy at all, right? Just a cardboard backing and this little strip around it. But what's great about it is in the past, I was using the whiteboard, and I would draw things on it. And I could draw if there was a funky room shape or they just weren't getting it. Sometimes it happens. You're describing a room, and you can see from the players and the questions they're asking that they're just not getting it. And at a certain point, again, as much as I appreciate theater of the mind, sometimes it's just easy to go, you know what? Let me show you. All right. You don't need to, there's no purity test. There's no prize for sticking to your guns. Like, hey, you need visuals. I'm not doing a good job. It's a failure on my part that I cannot describe this the way it's making sense to you. I can draw it out real quick. But the nice thing is that I can draw it and I can erase it. So if they leave or go away and they didn't make note of it themselves, I can erase it. And it just comes in handy. And of course, you got a bunch of markers to go with it. I don't really need this many, but you got them. So then you can use that. So that's the other part of the kit. And then I do have these, which I actually didn't use. These are little dice, what is this? Silicone, little dice trays that you can you just assemble it really quick. You disassemble, so they're really thin. They just fit. I have one that's sitting on my desk kind of permanently, and I have 1, 2, 3, and I have 5 that are just in this little container. They're not big. They're not big, and they're not particularly deep, but they're nice, and they're, easy peasy, something you can slide into your case or backpack or whatever. Let me see. Frederick says they used a Post-it for a BX character sheet one time. Yeah, you can use anything. I find the index cards are nice. I like them. I got tons of them, so it's easy for me to do. But yeah, Post-its, any kind of, you could use, notebooks. I like notebooks with serrated where you can tear easy. I mean, I know you can just rip it off, but I like the easy to tear sort of serrated edge if they have that, or the inner edge, so it's easy to pull off. Then I got these, excuse me, cheapo from Amazon, and this was basically for my game. It's a D6 dice pool, so everything is D6s, and this gives you a bunch of dice in tens. So each of these is 10 dice in the color. So I can give somebody dice, and I know they'll pretty much have enough because, I mean, I'm running level 1. So I don't know how someone will be able to get 10 dice. I suppose it's theoretically possible, but unlikely. But even if I was running a game and they were 5th level, they might be rolling 5 dice, and that still gives them 5 more dice. I have lots of extra colors. I could use them for different things. Super handy, and I have all I need, and in this case this case is a double-edged sword. I don't know if they mean it. This is the case it was shipped in, and it's one of those things that the first time I opened it, you kind of got to pop. You're trying to pop this up, and I hit it, and dice went flying out. Not too many, and thankfully there were no weird, odd spots where I couldn't get to them and get the dice back. And it's a little bit hard, at least for me, with my size of my fingers, to pull them out. But I like that they're separated. I mean, maybe at some point I'll just throw them in a big dice bag, but I like that I can just kind of go and grab them. This is kind of my newest addition to the kit, specifically for my game, which is, again, a D6 dice pool. And I have found that I think if you're running an open table game or you're running a con game, when you can bring stuff that people can use, like one thing I'll have to get is a bunch of cheap pencils so that I'll have. That's the one thing I don't have I don't bring a lot of pens or stuff with me, so. I have to get a bunch of cheap, miniature golf or golf pencils, those little ones, and get a bunch of those or something. Because you know what, I think with those things, people are going to walk off with them. It's going to happen. I imagine it'll happen with dice too. At one point, I'll come back and there'll be like one die missing, and I won't be able to find it. But whatever, maybe I'll be able to take care of it. But I think when you're running these kind of games, to the extent that you can have stuff for people, maybe people will have their own dice. Hey, Ian, people will probably have their own dice. But the two, I guess I'll get into it, but I needed these dice last night. So I was glad to have them. And like I said, again, I'm running a D6 dice pool. If you roll up with the standard, 1 or 2 D6 plus 1 D8 plus 1 D12, whatever, D20 and a percentile, it's not going to be, it's not as useful because I don't use any of those dice. And this way, the colors too, I asked, you can say, hey, pick your color. It's something else you can kind of keep track of. Really good kind of thing. Now, last night I did also bring, I brought the adventure, right? Got that. And I did bring BX, my BX folder, which I didn't need. And I was happy for that. I didn't really think I would need it, but you never know. You never know. And since I'm play testing a doc that I don't have everything buttoned down, written up as of yet, I thought, I'll bring BX in case I need it. But I did not end up needing it. So again, another good thing. So I have all this stuff. And the picture that's in this, I think I posted it in the Discord, and I actually used it for the background, the thumbnail, right? That was me, where I had everything set up. I'm looking out at it, and I had my the rule set, my playtest doc as it stood last night on my iPad, because I didn't have a chance to. If you went to the behind the screens channel, I was streaming yesterday as I was putting together this playtest document, or really trying to get it to a sort of a finished state. I did not get there. Probably unsurprising to anybody. I didn't get there, but I took what I had, and I exported it as a PDF, and I put it on my iPad, and I made sure I had it downloaded because I didn't know what internet and stuff would be like over there. And okay, I've got it. So I had that up on my iPad. I had the adventure, which I just put somewhere. I had the adventure, which does actually have all the stats and stuff that I needed, but I had it. I had BX. Had my dice, had my counters, had my whiteboard, had everything going on. Now the problem is I get there. I said I got there about 8-10 minutes before this 6:30, which is the players assemble time, and I guess they give a half-hour buffer for people to show up before you start playing. Well, that's assuming anybody shows up. So 6:20, say after I start, I kind of walk around and do a lap around the store. 6:25, all right, I'm sitting down. There was one table that was set aside for me, and it had a little thing so you could see it, for, open table, or I think they call it encounters. Like, great. So, okay. So there's one seat that's ahead of the table. So great. Nice. I take out my stuff, took a picture for, social media purposes. And then the waiting begins. All right. Now I'm already coming into this with very low expectations, but a little bit of a pit in my stomach of nobody is going to show up. And it's one of those things. There's my table, which was the only table that somebody signed. So, you have you have the ability to volunteer to be a GM, but you have no idea how many different GMs are volunteering on a given night. For example, I think for the Wednesday night at a different location, I think they've got 3 games that have been posted so far. One for 5 players, one for 4, one for 6. For the Monday game, as I'm watching this from Saturday to Sunday into Monday, I'm the only game that's posted. Now this could be good or bad, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it. Good, if you're going to come play a game and you want to do the role playing game, and you're not, because they have this encounter game, right? This open sort of game. They have other tables are there, but people are playing. It's a game cafe, so people are playing board games, and they had some other room. They had a couple of rooms in the back. Probably, I'm guessing, a little bit pricey to rent because they were enclosed. So I'm in an open room, but they have 2 kind of enclosed, like, meeting room kind of spaces in the back that I think you could take if you wanted to have a little less noise or just have a little more privacy or whatnot. I imagine if you're renting those, or you're I don't know. I have no idea what they charge for the stuff. At any rate, so I'm sitting there. It's okay. Now it's 6:30. I got my stuff set up, and I'm just sitting at this table. I noticed there's one other person at a table for 1 who's painting minis, and they're having a good time painting minis. Okay, cool. I see that other tables are there and they're playing games. I see people coming in, and each time a group will kind of enter the space, I'm wondering, like, are they here for the encounters night? And the thing is I'm nervous for 2 things. One, are they here for the encounters night? And then 2, if do I have to, is it going to be, well, I can pitch them my game, but then they might say, nah, which would be another bummer, but it can't be helped, right? At a con, at least the cons I've been to, except for PAX, but I haven't run a game of PAX, you're, let's say it's ShireCon, ClaraCon, these cons, your games are posted to some online, I guess, I forget the name of the interface everybody uses, but people go and they essentially sign in to buy. So you can still have that depressing point where we're looking and nobody's signing into your game, but at least you know in advance, and that's kind of how it's done. In this case, you have people who are literally just going to be walking up to the table, I guess. I don't know what happens. I have to go back at a night where there's actually multiple people GMing and see how it works when there's 4 or 5 tables. And I think, there's a way in the forum you can reserve certain seats. So who knows how it works. But in any case, I'm sitting there and I'm kind of looking at people. I'm trying not to look too needy, like, play with me. But at the same time, like, okay, I don't know. Are they here for me? Are they here to play board games? And over the course of between 6:30 and 7, people are coming in, and where my table is right next to this long row, basically there's a long wall, and where I'm sitting is kind of at one end of this wall where all their kind of games to be played, they're kind of open games that are there to be played in the cafe are a whole bunch. So people they could either, if when they're coming into that room, I'm kind of the first thing that they will pass before they turn and go to the game. So a lot of times they're coming, stopping, sort of pivoting right next to the table. So, and I'm kind of trying to sort of not look at them in the eye, but I'm like, are they going to do it? Okay. Nope. They're going to the game. Like, nope, they're going, I'm watching this happen. 6:30, 6:35, 6:40, 6:50, 7:00. And then I'm thinking like, my nightmare has come to pass, or one of my nightmares. Nightmare 1 is, nobody shows up. Nightmare 2 is probably people show up and I try to sell them on the game and they go, nah. And maybe the nightmare 3 was I get some folks who just begrudgingly want to play. And so they're not really into it, and it makes for an annoying, experience. And this is why when Frederick said earlier on about it's a test of your GMing, I don't think it's really fair, because I think there's a lot of variables you can't control. And you can't control people, either A, not showing up. You can't control people being totally disinterested. Like someone who shows up and goes, oh, I really wanted to play in that 5e game. Oh, but I guess I'll play yours. And the whole time they're really wishing they were playing 5e, so they're not really giving you their full attention or just a really great attitude. And I'm not saying I've had this happen, but I can see things like that do happen. Not to mention just having different personality things, which I totally have seen, where people are not gelling together. And that's not a GM can fix thing. That's just, you don't have a chance. It's an open table at a gaming shop. You're not picking and choosing who you're playing with. You're just like, hey, come and sit down. So it's kind of a little bit, nerve-wracking on several levels. Ian asked if there was an open table sign. Yes, well, they have theirs. They called it Encounter. So yes, there was an Encounter sign. And they do have it on their website in different areas that, hey, this is Encounters night. But I think the way they do it, and here's the thing, like, I was thinking about it, like, well, I would love if they did it like a con. But the problem is that I think for them, they don't want to shut out walk-ins, right? If they did it simply like, say, Claricon or where you go and I forget what, again, there's a website for it, like tabletop. I think it might be Tabletop Events has a way you can go and you can ticket for games. And so you go in and you buy your ticket there and then you go through and you pick your tables and they have that all figured out, right? So you're all done. But that kind of locks out of walk-ins. And I think for a shop, at least the way they're doing it, and this is my first one, so I don't know. Someone tell me out there how different shops do it. I imagine, part of me was thinking, I imagine that they don't want to dissuade walk-ins. They want people to walk in. They don't want people just to check it out online. And by the way, I think very few of the people who probably take part in this are online. I think it's one of those kind of, this is one of those things with gaming in general, right? The amount of people who are, everything that's going on the internet is happening in this bubble of the internet, but there's a much larger population that is outside this bubble for whatever reason. It's not necessarily that they don't know what the internet is. They're just not into it. Like, I know people who are super into games and stuff, but they're just not going on to Reddit or they're not going on to Board Game Geek and they're just not going there. That's just not what they do. That's just not how they interact. And so they're kind of out in the cold, so to speak, or on the outside. So I can understand how you have this small Discord community that's probably good and they're a lot, but they don't really represent the larger audience that you're trying to do. And I think they want people to, hey, it's Encounter Night, come on in, find the game. So it's about 7:10, 7:15 at this point, and I've been kind of busying myself by I have my iPad and it's got a little keyboard. I got the little keyboard on the case. So I'm starting to think, like, at what point do I sort of slide my stuff into my bag and just sort of if I had a cloak, put it over my head and sort of duck out and be like, didn't happen. And I'm having these thoughts right when two guys walk in and they do the same thing as the other people have done, where they kind of stop at the corner of the table to sort of pivot, but instead of looking at that shelves and go like, oh, there, they kind of look at me and they look at the thing and they see the thing like, oh, like, here, we're here, you're playing. And of course I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Right. So I was saved from an evening of humiliation's probably not the word, but sort of a disappointment. Though the funny thing is, and I don't know if this works with other people, I was in a weird way, as much as I said, like, it would have been sort of a nightmare scenario. It's like, there's two things going on. So what I've been talking about so far is this sort of fear, anxiety that no one's going to want to play. Either no one's just going to show up, or they're going to show up and say, like, you know what, I'd prefer to play Monopoly than to play whatever you've got going on. Okay, so that's the thing. But there's another one, which is now I got to actually do the thing. Because there is part of it's like, well, if I had left, I would have sort of deferred doing the thing. Like, because I knew that my playtest I didn't totally write everything out. And granted, the document's mostly for me, and I didn't ever show them the document, right? But there's this part of like, it's not done. I'm pushing the envelope. I hadn't really even read, I wrote this thing, but I hadn't read it in a while, and I hadn't read it. I didn't really prep. I probably could have prepped on the subway ride and read it again and gotten more familiar, but I hadn't. So it's not like I couldn't have used more time. I sort of did things last minute, and part of me, I will admit, was maybe thinking like, well, maybe it's not a bad thing. You're not really ready yet. The rules aren't really ready. You don't have everything ironed out yet. You haven't really read the adventure in a while, blah, 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 blah. You don't have everything kind of all buttoned up. And so nobody came, and next time you can do it. You can do it next week or the week after next or the week of the week after next or next month, next year, next decade, and then you'll have everything buttoned up. So maybe it was a good thing, right? In the end, that nobody showed up. Well, somebody showed up. So I was forced to be like, all right, now I actually have to do the thing that I wanted to do. I mean, I signed up to do it, and yet I think, and maybe, I don't know if folks can appreciate the struggle there of like, well, now I got to actually do it. And I think this is where, when I was talking to somebody, I think I was talking to one of the guys afterwards, and he was saying that he was interested in Vaesen, and he wanted to run Vaesen, but he hadn't yet. And he was thinking about doing it at one of these nights, where I said to him, I said, you probably don't want to do like and this would be the first time he was running any kind of game. And I said, you probably don't want to do one of these run the first time you're running a game ever, and it's not a game that you know by heart, and be it the first time you're trying it in this kind of open table thing. Like that, to me, is just doing kind of two things at once, maybe not the wisest idea. And of course, I said that all knowing that, like, I think I even said, like, for myself, I felt trepidation because I was doing something of a similar lack of wisdom, which is I'm playtesting the game, which is one thing, and I'm doing this open table concept on the other. I probably shouldn't do these at the same time, but I just did it. So maybe he'll go ahead and do it, or maybe he'll go and get some friends. But I think, at least for me, I've internalized this rule set's very simple, and I've internalized it to enough of a degree that I felt that part was comfortable. Like I wasn't learning. He would be learning a whole system and then trying to. I'm not trying to do that part of it. Ian asks, running your first game at a con, that's got to be rough. Well, he wasn't running at a con. He would be running it at that store. But yeah, still similar to a con. And now you don't know who's going to show up, right? So these two guys show up. One of them ducks out to get drinks. And here's where I'm going to just reiterate to just shake us out of our bubble. I asked the guy, well, what is your, what's your background? Like what games have you played? Mostly 5th edition. Okay, great. But he's played other games. He's Blades in the Dark, Monsters of the Week. He might even mention something else in there. So then I ask him, have you heard of the OSR? And guess what I got back? Blank look. No, I have not. I said, have you heard of the kind of the old school, concept? No. So I gave him the rundown, and then I kind of had to repeat a bit of the rundown when the other player showed up, and he, of course, had not heard of it either. So I just want to give it as your reminder that every time I've gone to where now, before you say, well, of course he hasn't heard of the OSR, they know Blades, they know Monsters of the Week, right? If I just in my brain, I always assume if Monsters of the Week, and it's not like I don't even know what, like, that's not that like, oh, Monsters of the Week. That's a pretty niche game. Even Blades, I think, is a pretty niche game. I feel like if you're getting into Powered by the Apocalypse games, I think at least, or my idea has been that you probably have heard the term. Got to be showed up. You're probably on Itch, or you're on DriveThru. You're in some of the. You're definitely leaving the WotC gardens, walled gardens, or maybe hedged gardens into further fields. But no. So, and this has happened to me a few times, but I always want to mention it because one, it always strikes me. I'm always a little bit surprised, but then I'm thinking like, no, but I shouldn't be, because we forget, being in the bubble, how kind of niche this bubble can be. And I didn't ask if they'd heard of Shadow Dark. I didn't go down a whole list. I said, well, Old School Essentials, Dolmenwood, Shadow Dark. I just said OSR. So no, hadn't heard of it. The other player who was interested in Vaesen, the one person who's played some games, but has played a lot, mostly 5th edition, but has played and enjoyed other games. The other player has not played nearly as much. I found out at the end of the night he's interested in Vaesen, but that was at the end. The only thing they played is 5th edition. So I kind of going through I kind of give them a bit of the old OSR sort of spiel a little bit. And mostly because my game, though it's not a BX clone, but the same kind of principles. I'm not running through the whole Principia Apocrypha like that, but I'm just trying, okay, this is what it works, and like this, and I'm just trying to, what I feel like with the 5e players, I feel like I have to do, and it's worked for me, but I don't know if it's going to work for everybody, is I really want to make them understand up front the differences in what their characters are going to look like in terms of their sheets and abilities and such, because you're going from a character sheet with all these really well-defined, somewhat over-the-top abilities to stuff that's going to seem a lot more toned down, and potentially, if you don't look at it with the right eyes, could be seen as boring or just week or whatever, right? So I want to try to smooth that journey out as much as possible for them, kind of up front, right? I want to try to reset expectations. So I kind of go through a spiel. I wish I could record it. Not that it's great, but I could maybe make notes for myself, and also I could have notes as I'm relaying it. Ian says it's a whole different avenue into the TTRPG subgenre, though. Totally separate communities. You don't see a lot of folk like Yohai Gal who moves from Power to the Apocalypse to OSR. That's true, Ian, but I would bet that most, if not all, OSR folks know Powered by the Apocalypse. Not necessarily. Now, remember, I'm separating, say, OSR folks from, say, old school folks. Yeah, there are people who've just been playing AD&D 2nd edition, and they don't know anything about anything because they've been playing AD&D for 30 years. But I bet if you go into almost every OSR community of whatever kind, and you ask about Powered by the Apocalypse, people know they know about it. They know about it. They've probably read it. They've probably stolen something from some of these. Like, they're very aware of it. And I always had a little bit of shock that some of these other communities don't have a similar awareness coming back in the other direction. Now, I don't know if that's because the OSR thing, the ethos is so much about borrow, steal, take, and grab from whatever resource. So you do that, and maybe if you're playing Blades or some other Powered by the Apocalypse World game, or like Monster World or Monster of the Week, that you're not doing that. You're kind of pretty much satisfied with that thing, as opposed to all the hacking and piecemealing together and MacGyvering and everything people do. But that's kind of the thing, right? If I go in the OSR subreddit, or I go in the OSR Discord and I mention Monster of the Week, people are going to know what that is. It seems like my experience has been asking people who are Monsters of the Week people about OSR games, and you might get crickets. I mean, the online community is going to be more aware. I think I'm talking more. That's kind of part of my thing is, right? These are people who offline may not be I think are a lot less aware. Ian says, I think Powered by the Apocalypse is still more mainstream. I would disagree. I don't know. I don't want to, I mean, we don't need to get in the weeds in it. I don't know. I feel like they're in the same sections of the gaming store. Powered by the Apocalypse isn't like a bigger, better, it's not like they're in, I mean, maybe they're in the Targets and Walmarts and Barnes and Nobles, and that might account for it, but that doesn't feel like it to me. But I don't know. I'm not in the woods. So I guess I'll take your word for it if you feel like it, if you feel strongly about it. But it doesn't seem like my experience. But maybe it is, because it seems like people, I had that one experience at a PAX a couple of years ago where people were printing indie games off of itch and still had no idea what the OSR was. So I don't know. Any case, so I ran through a spiel. Now, I had made some pre-gens, of which this is one. Was this the one I liked the best? No. So I'd made some pre-gens, which I'd put on these cards. I didn't really do a great job of organizing stuff on the cards, but I did it. But then I decided, which I thought would help for them, so I could kind of walk them through things instead of them just kind of looking at, what I had written, and can they understand my handwriting and whatnot and so forth. I said, so on and so forth. I thought I will just go through and do it with them. And the game, you can generate characters really quickly. So I had them basically take the cards that I had done and just copy the attributes, and the basic headings so they could use them themselves. And we just went through and rolled it up. So first we rolled their attributes, and it was interesting. Ian wants to know more about the Bone-Tongued Paladin. Well, this one, basically, Bone Tongue is what I gave to Speak with Dead. So the Bone Tongue gift allows you to have a chance to speak with dead things. So this is a paladin. The paladin in my rendering is essentially the cleric, because I feel like the cleric, especially in early editions of D&D, even later, is really a paladin in the sense of they're not a priest. They are an armored, they're an armored warrior with some spell casting and some kind of religious things. That to me is a paladin. Or you can call him a Templar. I might call him a Templar or a Hospitaller, but I went with Paladin. And I did that because this version of this game that I'm doing is meant to slot in, which I mentioned on the stream on the other channel yesterday, is meant to slot in if you want to play basically BX type stuff. It's not BX. Some things will have to be tweaked, but if you wanted to run things with the same basic expectations from a fiction side and whatnot as BX, then you could run this. Hey, Sral, thanks so much. I appreciate it so much. So you can do that, right? So that's the idea. So I instead of there's another version of this I'm making that's going to be much more idiosyncratic to me. So there's kind of two things I've been sort of working on, which I haven't really talked about, but I'm kind of working on two things. But I want to get this one done first, which is kind of a proof of concept, and it's going to be more or less like, hey, you want to run stuff with more or less minimal changes from kind of your BX type thing, but it's not BX, and it's not like, this is not OSE, this is not Swords and Wizardry. There's definitely differences, but it hews somewhat close enough that you can kind of, I feel like you could pretty much run things more or less. I still have to kind of write up what my sort of guidance for like monsters and things where you get some specials, but whatever, that's like a different thing, right? So we went through and I just had them roll their characters. Now, the way that the system works, at least the way this one works, is you're rolling a d6 for each of your attributes. You're only going to get a modifier if you roll a 1 or a 6. If you roll a 1, you get a -1. If you roll a 6, you get a +1. And those are dice, because I'm using a dice pool. So if you're a first level character, you have 1 die in your dice pool. If you're doing something that requires strength, which I call arms, and you have a +1, you would then have 2 dice you could roll. Now, on the flip side, if you are doing something with strength and you have a penalty to your arms, you have -1 die, which means you end up at 0. So, and these are things I was explaining. So how do you do something if you end up with 0 dice or you end up with negative dice? What you have to do is you have to use what I'm calling leverage, which is basically tools, anything in the environment, whatever. And I went through and I tried to reiterate this multiple times as I was going through, but like, what can you do? And I was very expansive. Okay, this is something that is very much, it's going to be very game table dependent if you're out there playing this at some point, with how easily you want to have people be able to get leverage. So, for example, in the games you're playing it, those guys love to kind of do jumping attacks. Like that was like, oh, we're going to do it. I'm going to jump. I was like, great. Here's an extra die for jumping. At your table, this is a one shot. These guys haven't played before. Like, I'm not trying to do that, right? If it's a weekly game, I might say that, hey, the first time you do the jumping attack, that's great, but I'm not just giving you a die just because you jump a couple feet off the ground. Like, you're going to have to do better than that. Like, I would probably do that in a campaign, right? In a one shot, it's fun. Like, and I feel like I can say probably that at least I feel really good about this game as a one shot game. Like, I can come in, I can set up really easy. We're not worried about progression or anything like that. I can set your level really quickly and kind of set you up. And then, yeah, you can just go to town. So I walked them through. I was, hey, your legs are for your speed. If you need to do something, run. And there's, I told them, I was like, hey, we're not going to be rolling a bunch of dice all the time. The idea would be that you really want to avoid rolling dice. What you want to do is that you want to try and do stuff. I worked through kind of that part with them. So we went through. I think one of them ended up having just 1 + 1. So they didn't get a gift. The other player got a gift, which I forget what he got. And then we went through and did their class, which they picked. And I told them, and I showed them, which this is, and for me, this is a, what do you call it? This is it's not a bug. It's a feature. It's a feature, not a bug. These attribute bonuses, at least the way I have them right now, and it could be subject to change, but I liked how it worked. That 1 die plus 1 die plus -1 die, it has, at your first level, it totally is meaningful. You got a 1 in 6 chance and you're rolling 1 die versus you could be rolling 2 dice. That's pretty good. And if you can get more dice, right, that's really good. And obviously losing one of those dice hurts. But over the career of your character, when you're getting some levels in there and you're getting stuff, that 1 die, yeah, it's a little bit of a pain if you have to lose one, assuming that I don't have some mechanism for doing anything with it. But it's not a big deal. And that's something I like about attributes, the kind of classic attributes. And rather than have big numbers that then just become, and I'm not nearly the first person to do this, I'm getting rid of the number. Like, I just want that bonus. Just give me the 1 die or +1 die or -1 die. And I've gone back and forth. Do I want +2 and -2? But I think 1 die is actually really good. It can be meaningful, but it's not going to overpower everything else. You're not going to feel horrible if you're at -2 and you're not, and then at the same time, at +2, you could feel like a world beater and you don't get that. So I think that +1, -1, but between 2 and 5, it's 0. So most people are going to end up average. But what happens is if you end up average or below average, because if you total up all the sum of everything and you get a -1, then you get a gift, which is like that bone tongue, and I have things about fire magic and different magic types, and there's a bunch of them in there. Some of them are more niche than others. Some of them give you bonuses if you want, basically bonuses to your saving throws. Some of them give you little things to other one. They're not as necessarily universally as applicable as your attributes, but they can be really handy, and some of them can be pretty strong, especially if you get some kind of synergy going or just happen to. Ian says, it's on the player to find a reason to get that leverage, but I'd be super permissive about what they can do. I'd let them do the jumping every time, but I'd come up with something bad if they miss. Yeah, there's a lot of things they can do with that. And I did incorporate some of the time towards the end when they were in the kind of the climactic fight. I did add some complications. Say, hey, you could do this, but you might require. And this, again, it's an easy thing easy for me in the system to do because most things require basically one success to do. And so you can do kind of compound things, but you need to get more successes. So if somebody says, I'm going to jump up, I'm going to swing across this rope, and then I'm going to dive onto the group of enemies, I can say, great, like that's all fine, but you can run, you can jump, but you're going to have to roll. You might take one success is the swinging and doing the jump swing on the rope. And then the second success is for landing on the folks. And depending on how you do, we'll see what happens. Like there was a lot of that. And the guys, to their credit, they were really open to it, which I really appreciate because, you're playing a new system. They don't know me from Adam. People had negative experiences with someone saying, come play my game. And it's some kind of weird and things like, so it always feels like as much as I think everybody should be open to playing games, it's always nice when people are like, hey, we're going to try it, right? We're not going to, they were very much like, all right, let's do it. Let's get into it. So I set it up in Escape. They start at the bottom of the dungeon, or not the bottom, but they start in the dungeon. Ian says, the way I think about it, they either need investment of time, resources, or there's a risk. Yep, for sure. So they start off in the not the very bottom, but in the dungeon. And they're getting into it, right? And I always would, especially with something like this, and I would recommend it if you're playing something like an OSR game, or if it was Powered by the Apocalypse with people who were coming from kind of a different kind of game, just reiterate. Like I didn't even wait. I would say, they would start to be thinking, like, hey, remember, like all this stuff, right? They would start to do something, and I'd be like, hey, do you have anything else? Is there anything you want to try do you want to try to tweak the situation? You want, we got all this kind of stuff going on. Like, what do you want to do? I tried to keep, sort of reminding them, reiterating to them, use your environment, use each other, use, whatever, use whatever you can do to get more dice. Cause I know that with first level characters, especially if you don't have, you rolled average or whatever, you don't have a lot of dice. So you want to use as much dice. I also, you want to get as much dice as you can. And again, like Ian's talking about being like, hey, open the field, right? Be open. If they try to do too much, or not too much, but they try to do a bunch of things, I might say, okay, well, that's going to take a couple of actions. If they had multiple levels and they had extra dice, I would say, yeah, you can do it. If you have, your fourth level and you want to run, grab something on the wall, turn, throw it, do something else, I would probably say you could do that, but you're going to have to make a bunch of successes. But you have 4 dice, and some of them you might have bonuses to some of those dice and whatnot. So yeah, go for it. But your first level, you're generally going to be rolling 1 or 2 dice, maybe 3 dice. I think at one point because I was giving out some inspiration, which I'll get into in a minute. So I know there were a couple times where they were rolling with like 4 dice, but they were trying to roll, everything they were doing. And this is just one of the not unfortunate things because it's going to happen, but they didn't have any warriors. So the one guy's playing a magician with the acolyte origin, which was cool because it gave him a weakened version of Turn Undead. So one of the things I'm doing with this game, which is obviously different than your ye old BX clone, is basically anybody can do pretty much anything, but their capability to do that is defined by their dice and by their essentially their if it's a skill, which I'm calling crafts, then however good or bad they are at that craft, and then their dice pool. So for example, if you're just normal Joe, right? Normal human, so you got one die, which you can't have less than 1 die. Well, I mean, you could. There are ways to have less, but in any case, let's say you have 1 hit die or 1 die. So okay, you're normal Joe, 1 die. You see there's a zombie coming at you. You decide you're going to try to the power of your faith in Palor or Hastor or whomever, and you're gonna say, be back, be gone. You can do it. You can try it. But because you are totally unfamiliar with the craft of what I call forbidding, your dice pool gets halved. So that one, and then I'm rounding down. So your dice pool from 1 goes to half, which goes to 0. So you cannot do it. Now, let's say in kind of Hammer horror style, you've got some blinged up cross that you've pulled off an altar and you're holding that in front of you and you're saying, be gone. Well, that I would give you, you have kind of this holy symbol that you believe in, your deity, whatever. I'll give you a die for that, right? So then you go to 2 dice, halved it, and you're going to have 1. Now you're going to have to roll a 6 still. So your odds are still only 16%, but you can try it. Now you only have 1 die. So if it's a zombie, you'll be able to turn it. You can't destroy it, you could turn it. If it's a skeleton, you'd still be out of luck because you need 2 dice. But you could have somebody else helping you. What if you had 3 of the guys and they're all gathered with you and they're putting all their energy and concentration and saying, be gone? Maybe you have 4 or 5 dice. Then maybe you can roll a couple 6s and you can totally do it. Or you could turn a high level creature. And so that works for everything. Everything works the same way. So some things potentially are what I call, they require, I don't know if I call it skill, they require skill. Like you can't do surgery. That's there are some skills there are some crafts that require some expertise before you do them. Like you might be able to wrap somebody's, I'll give you a first aid check. Go ahead, everyone knows how to tear part of a cloth off, wrap it, maybe put a tourniquet on there. I got you there. But now you're like, well, I got to do open heart surgery. That requires expertise. You don't have it. Spell casting requires expertise. So that is one where you can't just, I have nothing. I'm going to cast a spell. Like, like that requires something. Though I've even gone back and forth on it because some of the fun stuff would say Army of Darkness there, right, where you have Bruce Campbell trying to cast a spell, though he's reading from it. So that might be different. That might be reading from a scroll, which maybe I'll say reading from a scroll. That's not one if you could try to read it. But of course, if you don't understand it, you're likely to say the words wrong. So there's this kind of that. But so anyway, this magician, because he had the origin of an acolyte, and because you have a choice what to take, he took as one of the things he had his origin, like he took forbidding, which is kind of like the idea is, and I think it worked out pretty well, is the concept that this character had started life maybe, being an assistant to a priest or starting to go through that, the sort of priestly order, and then backed out, and changed their mind and decided to delve into the arcane. So they had this little, they didn't get enough of it to be a fully trained priest, but they picked up a bit so that they can do that a little bit better. So because they are familiar with forbidding, they don't get the full power of it, but they're not, they don't get a bonus to do it, but they don't get their dice pool halved. And he actually used it because we have this adventure features undead, basically undead and cultists are your enemies. So it was kind of a good get, but they didn't have a warrior, which meant that warriors with weapons, pretty much all the weapons get a +1. So they get to roll a 5 or 6 instead of a 6, which especially now makes a big difference. And there were some fights and some things where the 6s were hard to come by, and that hurts, right? And I was thinking like, man, if they had a warrior, they could do things differently, because I'm totally about like, hey, you want to help the other person. They were great about it. Like, oh, I'm gonna distract. At one point they're fighting these 3 giant centipedes that show up, and they're like, well, can you try to hold it down while I hack into it? And that's a great way of saying, oh yeah, he's aiding you, so that's a die, whatever. But still got to get a 6, which is rough. And if you had a warrior in there where they could have helped the warrior in some of those situations, get multiple dice, and then you have a 5 to 6 chance of getting it, like that probably, because they were rolling a lot of 5s at one point. Like it might have made a world of difference. But that's just how it rolls, right? Sometimes. And the other thing is I don't want it to be like, well, you need to have a warrior and you need to have this. Like, no, roll with what you want. And your job is to kind of figure it out. I'm not going to change the rules for you, but roll with it. And they did. And one of the things I was really happy about is they were getting in the role play, and they were picking up some strain, which is I have this kind of singular resource for everything. And at a certain point, you become weakened where the strain kind of gets into your mind or your body, and you just like it affects you. Like it really disadvantages you either with your mind or your body. And the magician chose their mind, and they started playing it up. They really were having a lot of fun because I told them, because I went through that thing. Because remember, I've talked about having some bad experiences, or at least not enjoying it when somebody just goes off. Like you have it, your wisdom is 8, and suddenly they're like, "Oh, I don't know when to do anything." Oh, and it's like I don't like it. These two guys were friends. They came together. They're the guys, so that was good. Because when the one player was adding a bunch of complications to it, it wasn't like there was 5 people, which you have 2 friends who are totally on the same wavelength and other people who are not, because that can be a real issue if one player is deciding to really leap into these consequences and really make things more difficult, which he was doing, and then some other folks at the table are like, "Why are you messing with me like that?" Right? So I reiterated a couple of times that, hey, the mechanics are going to take care of themselves. You have this problem with the mind that has mechanical consequences. So if you want to role play it up, I'm happy for you, but just know that there's no pressure on it. You don't have to. If you want to, great. If you don't want to, also great. But they wanted to. And he was making these really fun complications that I was feeding him, when he would do something that was really funny and really impactful in a negative way on them with this thing, then I was giving out inspiration. So that was able to get some dice, which were useful getting up to the climactic fight, because that was a tougher fight and they weren't really that equipped to handle it, but they were able to use to kind of dig in at inspiration to do that. I was really happy with the fact that they seemed to get the rules pretty quickly. They kind of got a pretty quick understanding. I mean, there's not that much to it from the player perspective. Like, look, all your things are either going to be familiar or trained. If you're familiar, you just roll straight dice. You want 6s. If you're trained, you get to add 1 to all your dice. If you're unfamiliar, your dice pool's halved, then you got to roll 6s. That's kind of like, you look at your sheet, you're a burglar. Every once in a while, they would say, like, well, what is this? It says I'm familiar with, appraisal. What does that mean? It's like, well, you can kind of tell how things are worth. You have a good sense of things are worth. Great. A lot of the stuff they didn't really have to use, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, you're a burglar. You're good at sneaking around, basically moving shadows and hide and that kind of thing. Like, great. You're the magician. He used that for bidding. He cast my version of sleep before his mind went. They had some fun stuff where this crew, they rescued. So the one character, his origin was as he was an apprentice mason. So you pick the apprentice one. And the apprentice one, you pick kind of what sort of tradesmen, kind of craftsmen you were apprenticed to. So he picked masonry, which was a good call because you're in a dungeon. So if you have masonry, that's a good thing to call on. And then there's one of the prisoners who's being held down there is a mason. So I had like, oh, hey, you recognize this guy from the village. But it was funny because this was after the other character who had his mind was in a hazy from being hurt from the strain, and so he was very distrustful of this new person showing up. So he was constantly trying to kind of angling to get rid of him or send him out in front. Wouldn't give him a weapon. So that was a lot of fun. And a couple of times the mason decided to try to get away and would run off and then come back. And he ended up running off. And then in the climactic battle, he came back. There was a lot of fun with them doing, figuring out things. They definitely got into like using things in the environment, just grabbing stuff and going with it. And of course, I was very open. When the guy says, I have a pickaxe, he didn't have any, he'd be unfamiliar trying to use a pickaxe as a weapon, but he said, he's like, well, can I break the handle so I can use it as a club? And I said, you know what? You can just put it sideways and use it as a club. I'm not going to get into like, well, it's less efficient if you go it sideways. I'm like, you know what? You can kind of club somebody with a pickaxe if you just turn the pointy ends away. And I'm not going to worry about the aerodynamics or the resistance in the air, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. If you care, then, your game, you can decide like, nope, sorry. I'm going to be strict with what weapons count as what. But when you're riding a fine line between being able to do something and not, and this little thing gives you that bit of an edge, yeah, sure, go for it. Because they both ended up with taking on strain, and they both ended up in weakened states. So the last battle, they were really fighting for those dice, which on one hand, it can be kind of stressful. It definitely leads to some tense moments because it's like, when you're like, all right, I got, they were like, I got all this. I'm pulling in. I've been getting this inspiration through the whole night, and all right, I got those dice. I got it. I got the strings. I got to put one aside. I got like, all right. And then it's like, it's fun. There was some times where I think at that time with all that, I think they got one success, or maybe one of those they didn't get successes. There were some times where they were trying, there was a lot of doing it. It ended up working out fun. I know, we were kind of getting there late, or we were, things were kind of not shutting down necessarily, but I felt like time was going. So that's when I had the guy come back. Like, he's going to come back. And they were able to sort of team up and by the skin of their teeth, even take the last guy down when they needed to. And I was, I was kind of in a rush because I felt like we had to kind of get going. So I didn't really have a chance to debrief as much as I would like to. Probably the next playtest I'll try to put in more time at the end where I feel like I can sit and either do Rosebud Thorns or do like a little simple thing. But I did ask them, like, as we're kind of walking out, I'm like, hey, did you guys have a good time? Did you enjoy it? Would you play it again? They were like, yeah, it was great. It was fun. Definitely seemed to have fun. From my standpoint, everything worked pretty much the way it was supposed to work. I didn't run everything absolutely correctly. I usually during combat, if you take strain during combat, which works a little bit differently than taking strain, having strain outside of combat, and I kind of forgot about that a little bit. So there are a couple things I need to just keep in mind myself, but I played it consistently through the night. It wasn't like I switched up halfway through, so it wasn't a big deal. You always have that, and I'm keeping in mind as I'm sort of processing everything. They struggled in some of the combat stuff. They struggled because it's a magician and a thief, and in my game, they're not. The burglars are familiar with weapons and they're not trained, which means they got to roll 6s instead of 5s or 6s, which can be a big deal. The magician only has that familiarity, but only with, I think, knives and staffs and kind of a staff. So their options in combat are limited. But I was thinking what I might want to reiterate more is not to change the rules, but remember, make sure they know in mind that, hey, you don't have to run into combat. Right, if you see a guy and he's staying down the stairs from you, and you can take a barrel and roll it down the stairs on top of him, do that, because that might have a better chance of success and damage than your knife attack. Do that kind of thing. Have one of you, if there's a guy on another side of an archway, and you can manage it. Make a rope to trip them. Right, there's like I think what I just want to make sure is, like, you got a lot of stuff you can do, because they would end up running into combat and then having difficulties in the combat. But kind of those kind of characters having difficulties in the combat is actually it's sort of what I want. Like, I don't want them. It's not about 5e where everyone's kind of equivalent in combat in different ways. Like, no, a magician's not a combat specialist. Like, yeah, you should cast your spells, get the heck out of dodge, hide behind somebody. If you need to, you can throw your knives, and they did. They were stabby and stuff, but that shouldn't be what you're trying to do as the magician. And as the burglar, you shouldn't be trying to do that either. The challenge for them in this kind of space is, and the thing is too, is there's really none of the combats are forced upon. There's one where, nothing's forced, because I made sure to reiterate this also, there's no attacks of opportunity. If a zombie runs into you, you can run away. Depending on initiative, maybe they get to hit you first, but you can get away. And then if you want to turn it into a chase thing and try to get doors between them and you, or whatever you want to do, you can do it. Like, you don't have to, like, you're not stuck. Like, oh no, now I'm toe to toe with the zombie and I can't leave. It's like, you can leave. Do something else. And I think I need to reiterate folks to take advantage of that. Though I did tell them a few times, I think in the last combat, I probably should have done more moving around with the enemies just to keep them moving, because they kind of got into, like, they were in kind of a smaller sort of room. So it wasn't a ton of places to room, but I could have had folks try to escape or try to get better positioning, and I didn't. So I got to remember to do that for the enemies, make sure I'm doing that for them, because I think them seeing their antagonists do it will also inspire them to do it. So between telling them and showing them, I think that will help. Hey, Croco. I got to bail in a minute, Croco, so you're here at the end again. But I just want to, I guess just to wrap it up, kind of go back to the front. I had a really good time. I wasn't thinking I would. I was I was trepidatious about it. And then that first half hour where I'm where I'm waiting for people who aren't showing up was also not a lot of fun. But I got 2 players. They were awesome players. I did tell them like, hey, I do have a YouTube channel. If you want to check it out at the end, do a little adverting, and I gave them cards and send them on their way. I think they had fun. It was nice to get players. They were 5e players, but obviously being from 5e, they're at least familiar with the general scope of how things work in D&D, which is good. But there are also people who are interested in other games or have played other games, so that kind of worked out. I don't know if I do this 10 times, right? If I get similar experiences, or do I end up with some poor experiences? I'm sure when I get around to talking to other folks who have done similar, I'm sure that some of them had sessions where like the players weren't good, or not good, but just not a right fit, right? That the things didn't work out. But this was a great first one to have because it got me fired up. I got a list of things I need to add into the playtest and just maybe tweak and just to clarify a little bit for myself. Eventually, this will go out to patrons, and then I'll do something with it on itch. When I get a full kind of players thing. I don't know. I need to do a bit at least on something about combat and equipment and maybe general encounters and adventure flow, I think, for players. And then that'll be kind of the players packet. And then I can work on more of the GM side of things. But yeah, it was a great time. I do recommend it. Know what you're getting in for, and just steel yourself towards things going wrong. I consider myself lucky that not too much went wrong, at least that I couldn't get around. But that's not going to be true every time, for sure. But I am glad that I did it, because it really pushed me to get the playtest stuff written down, because I've kind of been hemming and hawing a little bit. Like, I have it mostly in my brain, but you got to get it on the paper. It's no good to anybody other than me if it's just in my brain. And then just taking the plunge. So yeah, it was great. Glad I did it. That's it. All right. I got a jet. So have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody. And I'll talk to you later. Bye now.